Good morning, everybody. I sure hope your week's off to a great start. I know a lot of you are enjoying some time with your family on vacation this week for spring break, and that's awesome and great. And for those of you who are still back at home working, we hope that you're ready to have a great week as well. Our Made for Monday videos are really meant to tie the message on Sunday to what we do in our everyday interactions with other people. And so it reminds us to just keep our eyes open for those opportunities to share a little bit about God, to engage in spiritual conversation. And so I hope that you'll be willing to do that this week, no matter where you are. So yesterday we talked in Joshua chapter 9 and 10, and we talked about the conquest of the land of Canaan. We had already experienced such victories in Jericho and Ai. Even though they had that setback with Achan, they still took the city of Ai, and word began to spread, so much so that all the kings in the area began to be a little afraid. And they decided to form an alliance, had to go up against Israel collectively. And so you had the Amorites and the Hivites and the Hittites and the Perizzites, and you had all of them coming together for the sake of fighting against Israel. But there was one city in particular that did not want to do that. It was Gibeon. And if you remember, they had a really deceptive plan on how they were going to avoid that destruction. They wanted to make a vow with Israel, and so they hatched a plan, a con, a deception. And they put on tattered clothes, and they put on busted up sandals, and they had wineskins that had burst and had to be patched, and they brought old, crusty, moldy bread with them, and sold themselves as foreigners who had heard about the greatness of the God of Israel and what he had done to utterly destroy people. And they were coming to form an alliance, to make a vow with them, and to be brought under the protection of Israel. And so they did. They came. And to begin with, Joshua and the Israelites, wondered what they were up to and wondered if this was kind of a deception. But they ultimately made that covenant with them, made a promise to protect them and watch over them and to make them servants in the tabernacle and the places of worship. And so the Gibeonites make this covenant with them, and everything is great until the next city that the Israelites plan on pursuing turns out to be the place where Gibeon actually was. Well, it enrages Joshua. He's like, why didn't you tell me that you were among us, that you lived among us? Why did you give us this impression that you were way far off? And they said, basically, we heard of the power of your God, and we didn't want to fall into those hands, so we wanted to be made your servants. So do with us what you will. So Joshua basically says, well, you're going to be cursed, and you're going to serve forever, and you may do nothing more than just be cutters of wood and bringers of water. And ultimately, what we know is the Gibeonites were placed within the Levitical tribe. And so they were surrounded by the spiritual leaders of Israel. And they were surrounded by the worship that took place within the tabernacle. And those things began to influence them for good. And so what God was afraid of is, and the reason he had told them to annihilate everybody, was that he didn't want those abominable practices, the immorality, idolatry, paganism, to drift into the camp. So in this way, they were encompassed by the influencers, the Levites. Well, it turns out that the Gibeonites ended up, though they were cursed, it actually became a blessing to them because they were found to be faithful. They were people who, even when Israel often went off into idolatrous behavior, they remained there serving in the tabernacle and being a part of that worship experience. They had seen the idolatry, seen the paganism. They'd seen what that kind of immoral lifestyle had been like. But now they had been introduced into worship of God and the sacrificial system. And they saw what it took to give their all to God. And so the Bible tells us on a couple different occasions that the Gibeonites were there. They were always with them. They were brought into the covenant, and God protected them. And so it made me think about maybe people in your own life. Maybe people that you would not have given a second thought to teach or to spend time in spiritual conversation. And maybe people that you did spend time with, but just over time, their lack of interest or your frustration over them not understanding maybe what you were saying or what have you, that we assigned some kind of value to them and, basically just kind of said, well, they're just not going to listen. They're not going to be moved by that. Well, the action item this week is pretty simple. It's find those people and re-engage in their life. Recognize that God wants everybody to be saved. And the Gibeonites, though they had done something underhanded and deceptive, God still turned that curse into a blessing. for them. When we look back and we see David, one of his mighty men was a Gibeonite. We look back at the people who came back to rebuild the temple wall, the walls of Jerusalem. A lot of those people, if you read in Nehemiah chapter 3 and chapter 7, you're going to find out that they're Gibeonites. These are people who bought in to that relationship with God. And so God wants everybody to be saved. And I think it's important for us to not give up on people. So I want you to find people maybe that you have dismissed in the past, re-engage, get into their life, and once again be an influence for good. Understand it's not your job to convert them. We'll let God do that, but definitely speak on his behalf and be an influence today. Hope you guys have a great week. We love you so much. Can't wait to see you again on Sunday. Have a great week.